It is Wednesday, the second last day of August 2023. Welcome to Primetime News right here on Kutv. A day when the National Dialogue Committee leaders have signed a framework agreement that will govern the bipartisan talks. We will be telling you more about this and other stories. At the same time, we will be having a conversation on the climate change action with Charles Mwangi, who is the head of programs and research for Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. We will get to hear how the non-state actors are preparing themselves ahead of the Africa Climate Summit that is set to be held on the 4th up to 6th of September 2023. That will be Monday to Wednesday next week. But first, let us take a look at our top stories tonight. President Ruto launches Kakamega County Aggregation and Industrial Park in his 5th day of Western Kenya tour. Attorney General Justin Muturi faults WorldCoin, says it has been operating illegally in Kenya. Kenya Kwanza Azimio dialogue teams sign framework agreement to set stage for bipartisan talks. And Gabon President Ali Bongo calls for international support following military coup that saw him placed under house arrest. Sami Okelo is a sign language interpreter. My name is Joseph Kess. Remember, we are also live on YouTube at Kutv Kenya, and you can interact with us on the X app, that is formerly Twitter, at Kutv_Kenya and at Kess Joseph Kenya. Now, President William Ruto today continued his official visit to Western Kenya by visiting Kakamega County, where he launched various development projects. The president assured farmers that affordable fertilizer will soon be accessible in constituencies, encouraging them to use adequate fertilizers during planting to ensure increased and better yields.
President William Ruto today spent the better part of his day launching several development projects in Kakamega County. During his visit, the president inaugurated the construction of the Kakamega Aggregation and Industrial Park, a project that aims at enhancing farmers' and traders' income by encouraging value addition. In his speech, President Ruto reiterated his vision to strengthen food accessibility in the country, urging farmers to use sufficient fertilizers while planting to improve yields. He further notes that his government is working diligently to ensure farmers have easy access to affordable fertilizer.
Every county in this Kakamega, pangeni wakulima wenu, my office, the ministry is aligned, mupange vizuri, so that we can do edible oils from here. We have several crops, canola, we have sunflower, we have palm, we have another 2 or 3, that this is the best place. Utafiti iliyofanyika ni kwamba Western Kenya, from East section yenu mpaka ifike Lake Victoria, tuko na opportunity. That is not a market ya kwenda kutafuta. Hiyo ni market tuko nayo saizi ya 140 billion Kenya shillings every year. Mutakuwa mnaokota kwa hii maneno.
To enhance youth employment opportunities in the country, the head of state also adds that his government is in the process of establishing ICT hubs in every constituency to create online job opportunities.
Mambo yale mimi nawaambia leo ni mambo ya uchumi. Na hiyo ndio siasa ya kweli. Hii siasa ingine ya makelele tibi mtialala ria, hiyo siasa ya upuzi.
Later on, the president inaugurated the new Kenyan Medical Training College in the Navakolo area, Kakamega County. During the launch, President Ruto reiterated the need to develop strategies to send qualified workers from Kenya to work abroad, thus increasing employment opportunities for young people. President William Ruto has been in Western Kenya for a week now, dispensing various official duties in the region. Yvonne Kemuma, KU TV.
And police officers have apprehended the key suspect in the murder of a man who was shot during a robbery incident on the 1st of August at a cyber shop in Siaya County. The suspect, Charles Odhiambo, was arrested after forensic trails led police officers to his hideout in Awelo Estate. Preliminary investigations revealed that Odhiambo was part of a gang identified as Comrades, which is claimed to be behind a series of robbery incidents in the county. According to a statement from the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, DCI, several recoveries were made in his house during the arrest, including motorcycles, registration plates, mobile phones, home appliances, national ID cards, a printer, a projector, and screwdrivers, among others. The suspect is now in police custody awaiting arraignment in court. And Attorney General Justin Muturi, in his submission on day 2 of ad hoc committee probing the activities of WorldCoin in the country, stated that WorldCoin has been operating in the country illegally. Muturi told the 17-member ad hoc committee inquiring into its activities that WorldCoin is not registered as a business company for it to operate as required, raising eyebrows on the safety of sensitive data collected.
Questions as to why a company that was not registered in Kenya was obtaining Kenyans' data dominated the second day of WorldCoin probe. Attorney General Justin Muturi, appearing before the ad hoc committee chaired by Narok West Member of Parliament Gabriel Tongoyo to provide the legal status of the project in accordance with the Kenyan laws. In his submission, Muturi told the committee that WorldCoin was operating in Kenya illegally, contrary to what is stipulated in law. The Attorney General's submission leaving Kenyans with more questions than answers. Muturi further stated that Kenyans may fall victims to commercial appropriation of their image rights because there are no clear-cut legal remedies at their disposal. Section 974 of the Company Act of 2015 states that a foreign company shall not undertake any business in Kenya unless registered in accordance with the provision of the Act. Interior Cabinet Secretary Professor Kithure Kindiki, his ICT counterpart Eliud Owalo, and Health CS Susan Nahumicha will also be grilled to shed light on the matter. The 17-member ad hoc committee has 42 days to adjourn the task before reporting back to the House. Auma Evans for KUTV, Nairobi.
Now, Wiper Party leader Kalonzo Musyoka and National Assembly Majority leader Kimani Ichung'wah have signed the framework agreement to govern the bipartisan talks as well as the consolidated issues for negotiation among them an audit of last year's general elections, reconstitution of IEBC, and the establishment of the office of the official leader of opposition. The talks have been allocated a timeline of 60 days to deliver fruition, with the committee set to hold its first round of negotiations Friday later this week.
Even after headlining in antagonistic positions, ensuing a heated melee over topics for negotiation in the National Dialogue Committee, the two political factions of Azimio la Umoja and Kenya Kwanza have finally agreed to a stalemate, a consolidated agenda for dialogue. In the framework agreement penned down by National Dialogue Committee co-chairs Kimani Ichung'wah and Kalonzo Musyoka, the teams have resolved to deliberate on 5 key issues. Under constitutional matters, issue number 1 is cost of living, implementation of the 2/3 gender rule, among other issues. Under electoral justice matters, the committee will revisit the events of last year's presidential elections, the limitation of boundaries, and reconstitution of electoral body IEBC. Further on the table will be the establishment and entrenchment of the offices of the Leader of Official Opposition and that of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. In the entrenchment of funds into the Constitution, the committee will seek to entrench the National Government Constituencies Development Fund, the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, and the Senate Oversight Fund into the Constitution. And even while the issues for negotiation are in no order of preference, the last on the framework agreement signed today is preventing interference with political parties and coalitions. Ishungwa and Musyoka say all their hands are on deck to find some common ground.
I have appreciated the Senate for the work they put in yesterday and recognize that now our 60 days begin ticking from yesterday. And that is why we reaffirm our commitment to complete this process within the set timelines.
If ever there was a moment that this country should come together, it is now. And we are determined as a team to make sure that happens. And we continue to tell Kenyans to ignore the naysayers. There will always be those who feel threatened for whatever reason by something so illustrious, because this is wonderful work.
The charge for compromise is now on, and as per the timelines in the framework, a truce would be available within 60 days after rounds of negotiations and interaction with stakeholders. Muneneweru, KUTV.
And Kenyatta University, in partnership with the Vilgro Africa, Jazza Rift Ventures and other organizations, convened a two-day conference aimed at accelerating the growth of local solutions to address the challenges faced in the development and manufacturing of medical devices. According to a report presented during the conference, Kenya stands as the largest medical technology devices exporter in Africa.
According to the data provided by Dr. Victor Konde of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, Africa exports medical devices worth 600 million every year, representing 0.3% of global imports. The sector has grown by 189 million over the last 5 years. Despite the growth, the continent is importing about 90% of medical devices. According to a report presented in the conference, the global medical devices market hit 595.4 billion in 2022 and is expected to rise to 844.7 billion by 2028. Telemedicine and e-health was worth 87.8 billion as of 2022 and is projected to reach 285.7 billion in 2027, whereby health devices were at 116 billion in 2022 and will rise to 265.4 billion in 2027. Artificial intelligence was worth 14.6 billion as of 2022 and is projected to reach 102 billion by 2028. 3D printing in health was worth 17.4 billion in 2022 and is expected to rise to 34.5 billion by 2028. Nano devices and machines were at 1.3 billion in 2022 and may reach 2.7 billion by 2028. The Chief Technology Officer of Vilgro Africa, Wamboi Gachengo, stated that Africa should not miss such lucrative markets with high potential to improve healthcare services for millions of its people, sentiments that were echoed by Sewa Steve, the general partner Jazza Rift Ventures.
The mission for the next 2 days is to start building a vision for how we can transform how we think of, create, develop, manufacture, and distribute medical technology, which includes medical devices. It includes anything from PPEs and thermometers all the way to MRI machines and a lot of things in between.
And what we realize is that with these new technologies, the old model of bringing people to healthcare needs to be enhanced by bringing healthcare to people through technologies.
Kenyatta University Vice Chancellor Paul Wainaina, on his part, called on the government to increase its commitments in the medical devices sector by allocating more budget to research and development.
This is a very critical area for the university, where we are able to come up with, innovative, equipment by looking at what the university is offering, particularly medical, engineering and School of Medicine.
The conference served as a catalyst for capturing ideas on medical technology development and inspiring actions that will now make them a reality. Cynthia Nderito, KUTV.
Now, a group of Gabonese military officers have declared seizing power from President Ali Bongo, alleging electoral malpractices in the last general elections. The coup comes after the National Election Commission declared President Bongo the winner in the general election held on Saturday. According to the army spokesperson, the ousted president has been detained in his home and one of his sons arrested on allegations of treason. And earlier today, President Bongo took to social media platform X to appeal for help from the international community.
I'm Ali Bongo Ondimba, President of Gabon, and I'm to send a message to all the friends that we have all over the world to tell them to make noise, For the people here have arrested me and my family. My son is somewhere, my wife is in another place, and I'm at the residence. Right now, I'm in the residence and nothing is happening. I don't know what's going on. So I'm calling you to make noise, really. I'm thanking you. Thank you.
All right, we are taking a short break right here on Primetime News. Up next is a conversation on the climate change action with Charles Mwangi from PACJA, that is the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. Stay tuned for that. But first, let us take a short break.
Are you an aspiring media practitioner, a graduate, or you just want to advance your skills in television production? Then welcome to Kenyatta University, where education meets innovation. KUTV, the premier university television station in Kenya, is now offering short courses in TV studio, field technical operations, and video editing. Through these courses, you will acquire hands-on skills on camera operations, media production, lighting techniques, audio-visual editing, and sound and visual control, and how to operate key equipment in modern TV control room. Enroll today at KUTV and discover your full potential in cutting-edge TV broadcasting. Graduates of these courses will receive professional certificates. For more information, visit our offices at KUTV Studios or call us on 020-870-4252 or 020-870-4255 or SMS us on 0739-110-544. KUTV, a new experience.
Ukimwi kwa wengi ni zimwi. Vijana wanaoishi na virusi hivi wanakumbana na mengi.
Imekuwa tu ni matusi, hata ukipika chakula wengine wana reject, hawataki kula.
Ilikuwa uchungu. I went to an extent yenye nikaandika hard note, nilikuwa naenda kujiua.
Lakini
I have overcome self-stigma. I have overcome the anticipated stigma. I have overcome the external stigma.
Mradi wa Youth Care Wanaya Kenya unawasaidia vijana hawa kujikubali.
Kimenisaidia sana. It has empowered me.
Ungana nami Mutweri Eliud saa 12:30 jioni na saa 3 usiku tarehe 1 Septemba kwa makala ya Ukimwi si Zimwi.
Welcome to yet another informative session of Focus on Health. And Dr. Anthony from Kenyatta University is going to be guiding us on the treatment and diagnosis of ectopic pregnancy.
The main thing is, of course, to say that ectopic happens and it can be serious if it is not diagnosed early, and especially when it goes to becoming a ruptured ectopic, and it can kill a woman. So early attendance to antenatal clinics is paramount, because it is only by attending clinics early that we can be able to diagnose some of these complications and manage them appropriately.
What are some of the ways through which you can develop these skills so that you are comfortably fitting into the job?
You have to put yourself in positions where you are uncomfortable in the sense that you are not clear about what to do.
Because I used to work a corporate job before. So when I left, I happened to visit someone's farm around this area.
So this project is called Security Breach Detector and Readiness Familiarize. It is meant to be used to detect, detonate explosive.
We'll tackle all the tough issues, discuss all the weird moments, and hopefully share a few laughs along the way.
Kutoka kuwa jamii ya kuhamahama na sasa kujumuisha kilimo katika mitindo yao ya maisha. Kwenye toleo la kaunti ya Narok, hii ni Boresha Kilimo, kwani afya bora ni kilimo bora.
Kwani kilimo ndicho huboresha maisha.
All right, welcome back. Now, non-state actors to the Africa Climate Summit have issued demands and red lines ahead of the summit that is set to be held from the 4th to the 6th of September, that is Monday to Wednesday next week. Kenya will play host to the summit following a directive by President William Ruto, who is the chair of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change. The Africa Climate Week aims to tackle the escalating challenges posed by climate change and the consequent global and continental ramifications. Pan-Africa Climate Justice Alliance, that is PACJA, has been championing for climate justice, and tonight in this conversation I'm joined by Charles Mwangi, who is the head of programs and research for PACJA. Mr. Charles, welcome to our studio tonight.
Thank you.
It is a great pleasure having you back.
Thank you so much.
Now, perhaps how is PACJA preparing for the African, Climate Summit that is set to be held next week?
Thank you so much. The Africa Climate Summit actually was sanctioned really by the African Union some years back, I think in 2019. And of course, that came through because of the push that we, the civil societies, have been, the pressure we've been putting, demanding, for an African, conference on climate change that really addresses the plight of the African people and that canvasses, issues, that are relevant, to the common, African communities, especially those ones that are affected most by the impacts of climate change. And now, Kenya is privileged because our president is the chair of the Committee for Heads of States on Climate Change under the AU, and therefore he's actually hosting that particular summit, but it's an African Reunion Summit. Kenya is only a host. But we have that particular privilege of hosting this particular event. But just to say that we were really hoping that this process would be a process really that touches on the critical issues that affect, the common, people and the communities at the front of the climate crisis, like I did mention, And we hoped issues like adaptation would be given a lot of prominence. Issues on climate finance would be given a lot of prominence, and of course, looking at the special circumstances, for Africa, especially considering that we are a continent that is contributing risk to the emissions, but we are also the continent that is experiencing the greatest impact of climate change. And therefore, we have been following that particular process as non-state actors. We have been issuing, of course, our demands in terms of how we want this process to be, because we believe we represent the people, and we believe we must not lose this opportunity that has been provided, for us to come together as a continent and for us to argue our issues, to debate our issues, to dialogue as African people. So we are preparing for the same, but I want to say that we have a framework under which we are engaging in this particular process, and that is the non-state actors steering committee, which we formulated or we put together in April. And this is a committee that brings together a diversity of stakeholders. We have the indigenous people present, we have the young people, we have the academia, we have the women, constituency, the farmers, religious institutions, and we have been able to come together to form that committee, which we are hoping would actually be fundamental in the process of developing the agenda, for that particular summit, and of course designing the course that this particular conference is supposed to take. That may not necessarily have been the case, but I think we can engage in that conversation in terms of then how we are planning to ensure that we are not left behind in advancing, the climate justice cause for this continent.
Okay, so these non-state actors are the, the different groups of people that you've just mentioned. The youth, the women, they constitute the non-state actors. All right, and in your demands, you actually seem to portray the developed countries as the enemy of climate justice in Africa. And maybe how exactly are they contributing to climate change?
Thank you so much. We are not necessarily calling them enemies. We don't believe that they're necessary enemies, in this particular context. But just to say, if you look at history, the reason as to why we have climate change is because of greenhouse gases emissions. And mostly the carbon dioxide, that comes, from burning of the fossil fuels. Now, truth be told, the developed world, of course, a developed, area, than ourselves in Africa. And in the course of their development, that trajectory led us to where we are, because they emitted so much to the extent that now we have impacts of climate change. But those that are felt, in the continent, of Africa. But what you're also saying is that these countries, the developed countries, also have got the capacity, to support, adaptation and serious building for the communities that are mostly affected, especially from the continent of Africa. And therefore, whenever we are calling for action from those countries in terms of availing the resources that are needed to cushion, our people from the impacts of climate change, we are not necessarily asking for too much or asking for tokens. We are talking about the developed world, of course, taking responsibility and actually paying for the mess, because about 20 countries are responsible for about 80% of the emissions. But these 20 countries are also responsible, again, or they control about 80%, of the global total, global GDP. So they have the capacity to do so. But we're also saying they also need to cut down their emissions, because science tells us, especially from the reports from IPCC, that we need to cut our emissions by 43% by 2030 if we have to keep the 1.5 degree, target alive. But that 43% may not necessarily just come from Africa. Africa only accounts for only 4%. It has to come from the West. So reduction of the emissions is a must if we have to raise the dream of sorting out this challenge of climate change, but also resources must be availed, to support those communities that are mostly affected by climate justice. And that is the reason as to why we uphold the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, where we are saying whoever has emitted more must therefore pay for more, in terms of bringing, the solutions. But now the challenge that we have, especially with the design of the summit that is taking place, from forth, is that we are shifting, from that principle to this principle of shared responsibilities, which we believe is very dangerous for this continent, because we must continue calling and pushing for accountability from the highest emitters.
So is Africa contributing anything? Because I believe it also emits to some extent.
Well, given an opportunity, Africa also has got the capacity to emit as much. In any case, we've now discovering oil, exploring oil, and of course drilling the same, and we have the potential to also emit as much. But the beauty here is that because we are still low in terms of our development, we have an opportunity to take a different trajectory than what was taken in the north, or by the north. And reason being, we are well endowed with resources that can actually be able to generate renewable energy sources. We experience almost 12 hours, of solar, which you can be able to tap. Our geothermal potential is massive. We have hardly exploited even 10% of the same. Our wind potential. So we have an opportunity, to take a different trajectory. And therefore, we still also feel we have a contribution, in terms of making sure that our development is actually low carbon development. And that requires resources. That is why most of the national retirement contribution documents that African governments have submitted are so much ambitious. But again, if resources are availed for us to implement those indices the way they are, then we'll be taking a trajectory that is carbon neutral, so to say, or low carbon, so to say, at this particular juncture. But then if we are not supported to do so, then probably that dream may not come true in the near future.
Okay, allow me just to, make a follow-up on what you've just said. Maybe what is PACJA doing to ensure that the, fight for climate justice actually reaches even the rural areas, because, the non-renewable energy sources are still under use in the rural areas. What are you doing maybe to reach the grassroots level as well?
Thank you so much. And like I did mention, our focus is really so much on the communities of the front line. Because until we are able to touch the lives of those people who are experiencing, drought, those communities in Malawi and Mozambique, who, are experiencing cyclones every other year, we may not necessarily, be addressing this particular challenge. So we believe in what we call locally led actions. And PACJA is actually a signatory of what we call principles of locally led actions, where we believe in local level programming, where we believe that programs must resonate with the needs, and it must actually be consistent, with the felt needs of the communities at the front line of the climate crisis. But maybe just to mention that our role, of course, we are heavy on advocacy. We are heavy in terms of policy influence, to ensure, that we have a proper policy framework, that is going to guarantee, the flow of resources to the communities where it is needed most, and to ensure that actually even the role of the society or in the society have been able to access, justice and an opportunity to be heard. And coming to that, I want to say that taking an example of our preparations for this particular summit, we have a number of events, that are lined up, that are going to ensure, that we're able to, carry out our advocacy work and ensure that representation is taken into account. From tomorrow, we are meeting the Pan-African parliamentarians. And this is a follow-up of a summit that we conducted together with Pan-African Parliament in South Africa in May, which was also attended by President Ruto. And there was a declaration that the Pan-African parliamentarians were able to develop. Now we'll be discussing that declaration further and checking to see how can it be domesticated in various countries. So if those recommendations are domesticated, then the policymakers will be able to, in their own countries, come up with clear policy frameworks, that can be able to ensure that we're actually achieving that local led, action on the ground, and ensure that the communities are supported in terms of building their resilience to the impacts of climate change. Friday, again on Saturday, we have what we call Climate Change and Development for Africa Conference, which is a nearly large conference that we normally co-host with the African Union, with the Africa Development Bank, and with the United Nations, Economic Commission for Africa, which also the president is expected to actually, participate in that particular meeting. Now, this is where we look at issues of development and climate change, because you cannot divorce the two. Climate change is no longer an environmental issue. It is an issue that touches on the entire human development, spectrum, and therefore it's an important conference, which also is a build-up, to the African Climate Summit. And then, of course, we will also be having a big national conference on locally led actions. whereby we'll be looking at a program that has been operational in Kenya, which is financing locally led, actions in Kenya. And this is a project that's been funded by several institutions, including the World Bank. And we want to showcase, some of the successes and basically get to see how can we be able to replicate, those kind of initiatives. We were behind, the conversations around, formulation of that particular program, and that one ensures that we're able to reach the communities on the ground, because the implementation is happening at the county level. And most of the counties have been able to access resources, from that particular fund. Beyond that, the non-state actors will be having a convening where we'll be developing our own, statement, in terms of what we want to see in the summit. And within the summit, we also have about a number of side events that we're going to conduct. But most important to mention here is that this process, we feel, has not been very much inclusive. And we have had several meetings with the government officials, in charge of this process. We have had several meetings with the African Union itself, and we are saying we are continuing, with the engagement to ensure there's inclusivity, to ensure that the indigenous people are on board, to ensure the women are on board, the young people are on board, and we are saying this must not be another elitist, sort of a conference. The other thing that we're also saying is that we cannot organize, this summit, looking at it from, a commercial point of view.
Okay.
It's not a business conference. We cannot trade with people affected by the impacts of climate change.
All right, we will talk about that after this break that we are taking right now, and we will also talk about why you are afraid that the summit may fail to address, the issues that you have raised. We are taking a short break. This conversation will be back shortly. Stay with us.
Ukimwi kwa wengi ni zimwi. Vijana wanaoishi na virusi hivi wanakumbana na mengi.
Imekuwa tu ni matusi, hata ukipika chakula wengine wana reject, hawataki kula.
Ilikuwa uchungu. I went to an extent yenye nikaandika hard note, nilikuwa naenda kujiua.
Lakini
I have overcome self-stigma. I have overcome the anticipated stigma. I have overcome in external stigma.
Mradi wa Youth Care wa Naya Kenya unawasaidia vijana hawa kujikubali.
Kimenisaidia sana. It has empowered me.
Ungana nami Mutweri Eliud saa 12:30 jioni na saa 3 usiku tarehe 1 Septemba kwa makala ya Ukimwi si Zimwi.
Anamaguna salama bwana nende. Na kamuda njiregere kamuna tangazimiza mtu kamuna milioma uli.
Kwa leo mpenzi mtazamaji, kipindi hiki kinarushwa moja kwa moja kutoka Kaya Mzimuvya inayopatikana katika eneo la Rabai. Tutakuwa na mambo mengi sana ambayo tutakuwa tunayajadili na kukuburudisha.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to bring up on stage Miss India Kenya Worldwide 2018.
Well then, Mom. As it is, I'm moving to Korea. Nambi, you only have to stay there as long as you're happy. No one is forcing you.
Ziwa, I think Nambi is lying to me. Well, she hasn't really gone to Korea. She's with Dylan, somewhere near.
Really? What about you? Aren't you already planning to leave him? You seem to prefer Musoke to Joff. Emasa, how could you possibly know about all that? I think that's one of your absolutely diabolical plans. But no matter what you try to do to us, Sahara, I assure you that I will never leave my husband. and he will never ever leave me.
All right, welcome back. The conversation on the climate change action continues. We have Charles Mwangi, who is the head of programs and research, that is for Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, in studio to discuss the preparations of the non-state actors ahead of the African Climate Summit that is taking place next week. Now, Mr. Charles, why are you, the non-state actors, afraid that the summit may fail to address issues in your engagements with the government, that you raise in your engagement with the Government African Union Commission and Claim Africa?
Thank you so much. We are patriotic and we love our continent as non-state actors. And like I did mention, that non-state actors committee encompasses everybody, from across the continent. We can't talk about faith institutions without talking about all African Conference of Churches, for example, who are coordinating the faith cluster within the non-state actors coordination unit. You can't talk about farmers without making reference to East African Farmers Federation and the Raja platform, which brings together all the farmers, within Africa, and several other institutions, that are within that particular non-state actors committee. So it was a carefully constituted, sort of committee, and we hoped that vehicle then would actually be useful to the planners, to the secretariat that is managing this particular process, and we were actually offering ourselves for free, to support in terms of designing that particular conference, because we believe it is our conference. It is supposed to be a conference, for all. But I think there was a challenge in terms of how the secretariat, managed the whole process, because we realized that there wasn't space really for us as non-state actors, even though we had offered ourselves for free to support the process and bringing our experience, to be able to ensure that we have a conference really that resonates, with the needs and the requirements, of our people and what our people would really want to see. Now, we realized that this particular conference was almost taken over, by international, institutions that are not necessarily African institutions. And the fact that people contribute money does not necessarily mean, they really carry, the vision, of our people and the needs of our people, with them, at their heart. And that was one of the challenges that we actually had. So we have had several conversations with the secretariat that is managing this and with the government. Recently, we had a meeting, with some of top, government officials, checking to see then how can we be able to ensure this inclusivity in that particular process. The other challenge that we realized within the framing of the conversation is that this summit, had been converted into some sort of should I say, a business sort of forum, especially because we gave a lot of prominence to carbon market. And carbon market is really gaining traction, but it is still, a concept that people need to understand, that it does not necessarily translate, into solutions. For Africa, actually we normally call it, for solution, because it is a situation whereby somebody is paying us for us to clean, their mess, so to say. Somebody wants to continue emitting from the north because he can pay you to remove that carbon from the atmosphere, either through tree planting or through engaging in other practices that are going to reduce the emissions or basically remove the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. But you realize the way this particular trade is actually managed across the world is that about 1 ton of carbon equivalent, which is the unit through which this carbon is actually sold, costs between $5, sometimes $10. But if you look at the investment that goes, in producing that 1 ton of carbon equivalent, it's not commensurate, with the payment, that comes, with the same. And you're saying it cannot be that people are lying to us, that we are making money when we are actually sacrificing a lot, for us to actually engage in that particular carbon trading. You realize that carbon is actually expensive in other countries. You realize when people are trading, in Europe and other countries, it costs as much as $120. But how comes, when it comes now to Africa, that becomes a big problem. And people should stop, telling us about the question of compliance and voluntary market and so on and so forth. The thing is, this is a solution that is not necessarily, viable for our people, and we cannot give prominence to that because we cannot trade with the rights of our people. So we need to see aspect of adaptation, for our people, being given a lot of prominence, so that we can be able to ensure that we have been able to support our communities that are already experiencing the impact. Look at what happened in Northeastern. Look at what happens in places like Marsabit. People lost livestock, almost everything, their livelihoods. Look at Malawi and Mozambique, people losing their livelihoods. The energy systems in Malawi are destroyed every so often, by the hurricanes and so on and so forth. Loss and damage. These are conversations that we thought would actually take prominence, because we have been saying that the climate finance flow in the continent, or basically generally, looking at the entire, infrastructure for climate finance, it's about 25% that is dedicated to adaptation. 75 goes to mitigation. Yet Africa's needs, for adaptation is actually more than 80, billion. So the convention around doubling adaptation finance would actually gain a lot of prominence. The conversation around, establishing, the framework, for global goal for adaptation would have been given a lot of prominence in this conversation. But now we have converted this into a business sort of conversation. It's so much about trade. And I know the president is, of course, talking about a new, finance architecture globally, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But I think must we connect that, with this conversation around climate change at this particular moment, or are we supposed to look at those critical, elements that we must actually focus on and that are very, very urgent to our people? And I think that is where, or that is the point of departure. But we have been having conversations, like I did mention, and we hope, because we still have some few days, before the conference, that we'll actually be able to see an opportunity where inclusivity is embraced, an opportunity, where we are going to get a product that really can be representative, of the needs of our people in this particular country. Remember, this is not a Kenyan conference. It is a whole African conference. And the product of this conference will be discussed and will be very, very, very key in influencing conversations during UNGA, United Nations General Assembly, which is happening in the next, few weeks. And this document will also be useful to our African group of negotiators in terms of influencing, the outcome again of COP28, which is going to be held in Dubai, later in November and in December, this year. So we're still calling for that inclusivity. At least there has been some conversations. We have made our proposals. We're engaging because we believe in dialogue, because it's our process. And we must actually ensure that it's a process that responds to the needs of all the people.
All right, and in your demands, actually, whatever you're talking about, you've called upon the African leaders, to reject false solutions and narratives, and including the carbon markets, and perhaps the geoengineering, nuclear energy, and principles of shared responsibility. You claim they might be misled, in the issues that I've just listed. How exactly?
Yeah, like I did mention, we must be very careful around how the conversation around climate change is the shape it is taking in the world. And there has been that particular dichotomy whenever we go for COP negotiations, whereby in Africa we are pushing, for our position, and the West will always be against in that particular position, which should not actually be the case, because it's clear that the impacts, and science has shown that Africa is actually experiencing the worst impact. In fact, some regions in Africa are already warming beyond the 1.5 that we're talking about. So these impacts are real, and we are saying that it's clear. We normally argue that we are all in the same ship. Africa may be in the lower deck, the others could be the upper deck, but when these ships start sinking like Titanic, we all go down. So therefore, it should not necessarily be an issue of Africa pushing for its own, positions, and that position is not being supported, from the West. Actually, it should be clear knowledge that we need to all work together in terms of ensuring that Africa is actually supported. But we are saying that principle of common but differentiated responsibilities under UNFCCC is a principle that we must really uphold.
Okay.
Those who have emitted more, they bear more responsibility.
All right.
But shared responsibility would mean that, okay, fine, so we have all contributed equally, and therefore we must come to the table and think, together. We must not ignore those historical, issues that we must take into account.
All right.
Carbon markets, like I did mention again,
okay.
We are not demonizing carbon markets, but we are saying those are not solutions that we want to embrace. And talking about geoengineering, also about sinking carbon through soil radiation, modification and other geoengineering technologies. That again will not necessarily address our challenges. Let us put the money where it's needed most.
Okay.
Adaptation for Africa.
All right.
Loss and damage.
All right.
It will be good.
All right. I'm afraid we have to end it at that. We still have many more issues because the conversation on climate change and climate justice is one that will never end. Thank you so much for making time for us tonight, Mr. Charles Mwangi from PACJ. Now, moving on, the International Institute. Apologies for that. The International Institute for Legislative Affairs, led by the chairperson, Selena Awor, today held a consultative meeting to discuss measures to curb alcohol consumption in Kenya. According to keynote speakers, alcoholic advertisement should be regulated, and the government has to be in the front line in preventing excessive alcohol consumption among the youths.
Alcohol advertisement has been stated as the main issue ailing excessive consumption of alcohol among the youths, and according to International Institute for Legislative Affairs chairperson Celine Awor, a bill on alcoholic drink control has been put in place awaiting amendment. The bill is said to seek intervention in restricting advertising of alcohol on public platforms, increasing the legal drinking age from 18 to 21 years, and regulate specific trading days and hours for alcohol to be distributed and manufactured.
And we're looking at how the law is in terms of effectively addressing the issues of alcohol harming the country and the areas that should be strengthened as the country is looking at ways of addressing or curbing the alcohol issues. We know that the Deputy President has been very vocal about this. This is an issue that the current government is keen on, to see that as a country we address the issues of alcohol harming the country. So today we were looking at what is in the law, what needs to be strengthened, even as there are plans to amend the legislation to make it strong in terms of addressing the problem of alcohol harming in the country.
Additionally, according to keynote speaker Wachira Kiragu, there is need to put in place policy measures to be considered while trading alcohol. Kiragu stated that a framework should be formulated to regulate manufacturing of alcoholic substances.
For spatial planning and effective zoning, of course the challenge is the exceptions to think through, but even as we urbanize, the problems don't cease to exist. That's why I liked one of the counties talking about zoning, alcohol-free zones, for example. Even that's what Sakaja, the governor of Nairobi, is trying to do. Limiting where you can sell alcohol, where you can't sell. Because if you leave it free like that, it becomes a problem.
On the other hand, Professor Charles Parry from South Africa reiterated that the government should put in place alcohol policy that will play a big role in regulating consumption. In line with that, Professor Charles highlighted the importance of regulating the trading hours for alcohol.
Around the area of addressing the availability of alcohol, I particularly spoke to the issue of having better, more limited hours for alcohol sales, particularly on consumption sales, and I presented data from South Africa and elsewhere showing that reducing the hours of retail sale of alcohol really does have a dramatic effect on consumption of alcohol, and then following on that from harms of alcohol.
The event aims at bringing together different stakeholders together with the national government in coming up with prevention measures to curb the misuse of alcoholic substances. Edon Nyamu, KUTV.
And on sports, Manchester City and Norwegian striker Erling Haaland scooped the 2023 Player of the Year award in English Premier League title league after a successful season with Manchester City. Erling Haaland scored 52 goals for the citizens in his debut campaign and went on to lift a treble of trophies, including the EPL title, the FA Cup, and the UEFA Champions League. Arsenal's forward Bukayo Saka won the Young Player of the Season award and made it to the Premier League Team of the Year, which has 5 Man City players and 4 Arsenal players, including City's captain Kevin De Bruyne and the Gunners' captain Martin Odegaard.
They've all been quality. The Lion who looked as if he might just have kept it out, but you could see then the ball was over the line and inside the goal.
All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Our sign language interpreter has been Samuel Kilo. My name is Joseph Kess. Until we meet again next time, enjoy the rest of your week and have a good night.
Are you an aspiring media practitioner, a graduate, or you just want to advance your skills in television production? Then welcome to Kenyatta University, where education meets innovation. KUTV, the premier university television station in Kenya, is now offering short courses in TV studio, field technical operations, and video editing. Through these courses, you will acquire hands-on skills on camera operations, media production, lighting techniques,